Welcome to the Self-Reflections podcast, where real reflections are shared by real people. Today's guest is Sean Philander from Perth, Western Australia. Today's episode is a special one. It's a conversation about resilience, loss, identity, and the lifelong impact of trauma. This is the first time Sean is publicly sharing the depths of his personal journey, and I am honoured to hold this space for him, as well as explore the realities of complex PTSD, resilience, and reclaiming one's life. Sean, welcome to the Self-Reflections podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. As we said off camera, it's so good for me to be in a space where I can actually talk about this and share it. So I'm really thrilled to be speaking to you about this.
Sean, let's start where it all began. What led you into, already know that there's a history of law enforcement. What led you into that life way back when?
Okay, so believe it or not, growing up, I wanted to be a vet.
Really?
As in a veterinarian.
Yeah.
And then I think I was around 15 years old, 14 or 15. And I had to, unfortunately, have one of my dogs put down. And that's what flicked the switch for me. I thought, okay, if I was a vet, there's no way in the world I could do that. Yeah, it's humane, but that's not for me. Then I went to uni. My first year in uni, I actually studied IT. So I studied a Bachelor of Business only because all my friends were doing it. Computers were the thing. And so I thought, okay, I'll follow suit. And in that first year, that's when I decided that's not for me. Yeah, I'm pretty good with the computers, but that wasn't where I saw my life sort of leading. Then I took a few months off to really reflect. And I decided, okay, I like people. So I'm, at my core, I guess, a humanitarian. Then I went to study psychology, but I did the 4 years and then did postgrad in forensic psychology because that criminal aspect of psychology really intrigued me. At the time, I figured, okay, I had a particular interest in criminal profiling. And at the time, the only thing really available in that space was, working in the prison systems and et cetera, which really didn't interest me all that much. Then I figured, okay, I'm going to see what the police services have to offer in that, area. The WA, I looked at them first, the WA police. They weren't all that established. At the time I was looking at them, they did have some kind of profiling aspect, but they'd brought over some FBI agents to help out with this with a serial killer case at the time. So we're talking mid-90s here, early mid-90s. And again, it was the scope for me joining the WA police and going into that field wasn't great. And that's when I started with the federal police. They had a wider reach. So I approached them, ended up joining the federal police, entered into their forensic unit. So not really profiling, but more forensics in general. And then the Bali bombings and all that kind of stuff happened. And that opened up the counterterrorism profile. They really started recruiting heavily into that portfolio. Again, I figured, okay, I could do that for a couple of years, and I ended up staying for 17. So,
yeah, wow. And such a fantastic way of being able to move through the intricate levels of what's on offer in Australia. And that's such an exciting and very interesting line of work. And I'm sure that it has its ups and downs. When you're weaving through the industry like that and trying to find your place, did it feel like somewhere where you could really grow your roots and develop?
It did. Look, the AFP are very good at developing skills. So they invest a lot of money into upskilling their investigators. So we were very well skilled in what we did. But that was investigations. That was conducting an investigation, complex investigation, but investigations nonetheless. There was, for me, to answer your question, there was an aspect of what I had an interest in, which was that profiling. So there was a certain aspect of that in terms of an initiative that the Australian government introduced, which is called CVE, which is Countering Violent Extremism. And basically all it was introducing a counter-narrative for the narrative that these terrorists and would-be terrorists bought into, So, and also what causes somebody to become radicalized, and again, introducing a counter-narrative to de-radicalize that person. And, somebody that was at the forefront of that initiative as well was Anne Alley. So Anne she's a member of parliament now, but Anne played a big role in introducing that.
So, Sean, when it comes to those early years, I know that you mentioned in our connection previously that there was complex PTSD. Looking back, what were the early signs of your distress before any diagnosis was mentioned to you? What were some of the signals that you may have overlooked or suppressed or didn't actually acknowledge existed?
Nightmares. That's how it manifested for me in the initial stages. But I put that down to just a side effect of what we're dealing with. So you deal with a horrific scene, for example. I just put it down to, okay, it's normal to have a nightmare about it. I was in denial for a long time that, something was amiss, even though I felt it. And I could feel myself actually slipping, becoming like more and more disconnected from, I could still function in terms of work, but I'd poured so much attention into developing that work persona that the rest of me fell away. And I didn't realize it. In hindsight, with all my healing, I can look back now and say, okay, that's what actually happened. But at the time, I just kept going, ignoring the signs and, being well aware they were there, but making excuses for them, trying to rationalize them in a way that...
As part of the industry.
Correct, yes.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason I started, well, not started, but the other reason I suppressed it for so long was indeed the culture.
I was going to ask, did the environment, was there limited support when it came to mental health,
It was. I'll give you an example, and I really don't want to rubbish the AFP, but at the time, their support was quite lacking. So I'd been to, I probably can't mention it openly just yet because there's certain secrecy restrictions
Of course.
still attached to that. But I'd come. It was an overseas posting, and I come back, and I was very disturbed by what I'd dealt with. Not just me, the team. And our debrief was, we had the group debrief as we usually do, but then our individual debrief was with psychologist, or in some cases a social worker. But it was a 45-minute session. 25 minutes or 20 minutes would have been, talking. And then the rest was a multiple choice sheet that you had to tick and flick. That really essentially was it. But that 45 minutes wasn't an honest debrief. It was just something we did. It was just part of the process. So it was not,
Yeah.
for me personally, it wasn't like a session where I could openly disclose that I really wasn't tracking well, or I really had problems with what I just dealt with, So again, in terms of support, providing support, it was quite lacking.
And then we want to normalize, we don't know what we know now. And I think a lot of industries have come a long way and have a very long way to go. But when we look back 10 years, 20 years, the way that first responders and individuals in very, very high trauma environments are taken care of, it was very limited, and sometimes might still be. Some people might not have the training, or they might engage in just a tick a box, we've done the right thing by our staff, but not actually realize the sometimes even delayed impacts that some individuals may experience. And for you, Sean, it sounds like those nightmares or those kind of re-experiencing the trauma was occurring, and it sounds like there wasn't much of a safety net of being able to be quite open and honest about the impact of that, given the restrictions or limitations, I think is a better way of describing it at the time.
Absolutely. And even, all your colleagues are in the same boat. They're all going through the same thing. So you can't really bounce off each other, because everyone's trying to deal with what they're going through on their own, like trying to navigate their own hardships with whatever they're dealing with. So there was a lot of, and this isn't exclusive to the AFP, it's all emergency services, a lot of dark humor, a lot of surface level stuff, ask what we were really going through. And also, it's a strange culture, because you're well aware that your colleagues are struggling as much as you are, but the culture dictates that you project otherwise, that you project this persona that I'm dealing with it just fine, I'm robust, I'm resilient. You're absolutely not, because you're completely the opposite of that. But it's just projection of being together. Yeah.
And just on that, only earlier today I was having a conversation where we were talking about, I think, trauma and the impact. And funny enough, it is in the context of, first responders, law enforcement, things like that. And this mentality of I will be seen as weak. I am weak. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that when we look at acknowledging that there is something happening that is impacting our ability to cope, not speaking, that is what then turns us into this suffering and this shame spiral that that it's so far from strength, and I think we very much get programmed to believe that if we just keep it in, and if I just have this stiff upper lip, and I'm tough as cement, that I'm going to be portrayed as strong. And it's a facade that works, for so many of us in so many different ways. And it sounds like in some cases it's kind of what you describe you experienced as well.
Absolutely. I mean, for so long, I truly believed that I was being resilient and tough, and being able to handle it. Oh, it just couldn't be further from the truth. I was really falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You mentioned that there were nightmares that you initially experienced. that's one of the kind of symptoms of PTSD, we know, and it can manifest in so many different ways. How did it start to then get worse and worse for you over time as it was not acknowledged or untreated?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the nightmares became a lot more vivid. Um, to the point where I could actually, when I'd wake up from the nightmare, I could actually. It was like I was actually back in that situation where I could, if it was a hot country, I could feel the heat on my skin when I'd woken up and things like that. So they became more and more vivid. The other symptoms that I had that sort of manifested slowly was with this really strong sense of paranoia. Um, and that was as something as benign as going to a shopping centre. I felt threatened. Just, I was always hypervigilant. And to a point where I got really anxious and I just couldn't stand being in a crowd. Noise was another thing, sensitivity to noise. I just couldn't handle it. I was so sensitive to it. And then it just grew from there to my triggers just became so intense. Even the smell of the slightest hint of smoke in the air when there was bushfires around would remind me of a scene that where there was where there was smoke involved, or after a bombing, for example.
Mm.
Yeah, so where it eventually completely fell apart for me was I was posted to Jakarta at the time, and we were working out of the Australian Embassy, and my apartment was just down the road from the embassy. And this particular day, we were told not to go to work because of civil unrest. And it was, it was unrelated to us. It was just, I think it was an election, something about an election. I remember that. So there was protesting in the main street there, and I looked out of the window, and I saw thousands and thousands of people in the street, and that then was my trigger to an event that I was directly involved in the Solomon Islands.
Mm.
In that particular situation, there was civil unrest as well. Again, political unrest is related. The situation there is I became detached or separated from my particular group. So I was completely isolated and set upon by, my guess would be 200 people.
Yeah.
A lot of people. But I was very lucky that day. I really could have, I came very close to death that day. Wasn't a fireman. Yes, a fireman from New South Wales was driving in the opposite direction, and that's the guy that saved my life. And I don't even know his name. I haven't seen him since. I haven't heard. He was driving the opposite direction, and he saw we were wearing uniform at the time, and he saw this blue uniform on the ground. And to his credit, he fought his way through the crowd, dragged me into his car, and drove me back to base. So that situation in Jakarta set me off. I broke out in a sweat. I was cowering in the corner of the apartment, of the bathroom of the apartment, and completely paralyzed. I don't know how long for, but when I felt okay enough to reach for my phone and call for help, I called my supervisor, and he lived a couple of floors above me, and I said, I'm in trouble. I'm not doing well, and I was flown back to Australia, and that's where I was diagnosed, and that was in and that was in 2014 April.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for sharing such a scary and overwhelming recollection of what what you had to endure, Sean. What you described there is exactly what many individuals experience when they have had a or many traumatic incidents that they just suppress and aren't able to process. And it's not because it's not just because of suppression, it's because our brain can actually not process trauma. And I might talk about that a little bit later, but in that moment you genuinely thought like you were being attacked, like it was that day where your life was in threat, and your brain in that moment, your alarm system, your survival mechanism kicked in, and you didn't know, you couldn't differentiate the difference between what happened on the islands and what was happening in that outside that apartment in that moment.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
I was back in there. I'd never experienced anything like it. It was awful. It really
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
It would have been absolutely, when we completely get overwhelmed by our nervous system overreacting and flipping us out of our window of tolerance. Nothing makes sense. Everything's on fire internally. We're in absolute panic, and our naturally what occurs is our prefrontal cortex, the logical part of our brain, goes completely out the window. You're unable to tell yourself, dude, you're an apartment, everyone's outside, no one's around you. None of that is able to be accessed. And so therefore the emotions just keep perpetuating this extreme panic, and your ability to then feel safe gets narrower and narrower and narrower, to a point where it really does feel like your life is in complete threat again. Yeah, that
Yeah.
would have been a very scary experience, both on the islands and then also in that apartment, because our body doesn't know the difference. It's having the same type of reaction in both of those scenarios.
Exactly. And the actual event in the Solomon Islands, I I didn't actually have. I wouldn't say I didn't have time to process it. I just didn't process it at all because I was so. So I was. The event happened. So they have a little medical clinic set up at our base. I was there overnight. And they flew me over to Brisbane, medevac me over to Brisbane Hospital, and the focus then was really around physical recovery. You know, um, there was no follow up on my psychological well-being whatsoever. You know,
Hmm. And that's so common. That is so common for individuals, whether it's car accidents or,
Mm.
other type of accidents, these horrific experiences. All of majority of the focus is mostly on physical health. Let's heal your bones. Let's make sure your cuts are stitched up, making sure that
Yeah,
you're physically able to walk out of the facility, and
yeah.
don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that they don't check on your well-being and mental health, but it's definitely not the primary thing that they focus on.
No, it's not. And look, it was all very nice. So the police commissioner at the time, it was Mick Kilty. He gave me a call just to, a welfare check, basically. How you doing? Um, John Howard was the prime minister at the time.
Prime Minister.
I got a call from him, and it was all, kind of checking in, and um, but there was no. It was just a brief check in,
Yeah.
And to be fair, I actually felt that that I was okay. Yeah, I was a bit shaken up. I didn't. I knew it was a close call for me, and I was a very serious situation. Like Honiara,
Mm.
we were the entire town virtually burnt to a crisp. Like that it was awful. Um,
So
but
again, you were comparing, I guess, what you experienced to that and minimizing your experience.
correct,
Um,
yeah.
okay. Hmm.
Um, So 2014, that's when I was diagnosed, and I actually didn't know what to do with that diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my initial reaction was that I was broken. Like, okay, this is me. I've got this disability. Essentially, that's how I took it as, because again, obviously I was aware of PTSD, but I thought it was something you attribute to military veterans or something like that. It was something exclusive to them. Didn't think it'd ever happen to me, because
Yeah.
in previous I was being resilient, right, quote unquote. So so it took a little while for me to get my head around that diagnosis. Yeah, because I thought, okay, this is end days for me. There's no coming back from this.
That would have been so hard because, you know, who you were in your identity in your work to then be told that there is this. And I'm not one to slap diagnoses on anyone or anything. It definitely does help in some individuals understand what is going on, so they have an understanding of the fact that there is treatment and that they're not going crazy, that they're, there is actually something that your brain got put under and stopped functioning in the way that it could function without the trauma being there, and but it very much does feel, and from what you're explaining there, Sean, it's this complete ripping apart of an identity of who you thought you were because this diagnosis got slapped on you.
That's exactly right. And that identity that's a pertinent point, because really the role that I was in was so all consuming, like it does become your identity.
Yes,
Uh,
completely.
yeah. Because mentally in a job like that, you can't leave it. Like, you come home and you still carry the weight of the job with you. So, and with that level with counterterrorism, for example, everything's top secret. So there's no outlet, you know,
Oh,
so everything just stays with you all the time. Um, so that identity, as toxic as it was, when that gets ripped away from you, it's quite a scary prospect. It certainly was for me. I felt completely, okay, this is, who am I now? I just felt like I was a shell. I really,
yeah.
I really did. Very lost, very scared, because, um, you know, it had opened up this world I was completely unfamiliar with, this scary, dark place. I didn't know what recovery or healing would look like. I was I was open to talk therapy. I mean, that's all I knew at the time. Like, yeah, absolutely, I'll go to a psychologist and talk, because for me it'll be a relief to get
Yeah.
off my chest. Um, having said that, I did have to, in those initial stages, had to shop around for a therapist that was a good fit. The first guy that I went to, um, which he just didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't connect with him. I couldn't. I wanted to. Um,
And I want to normalize that, not every therapist we go to is going to be the right fit, and that's okay. I love that you, sounds like, had the knowledge of, okay, well, I don't have to stay here if this isn't working for me.
yeah, and I did, and it was trial and error, and I eventually um, found a psychologist who'd been in the military. She was a military psych, um, and I think that's what made me feel a bit more comfortable with her as well. That she kind of, was, even though it's different, but it's similar in military
Yeah.
fee. She, I just felt that I could make some headway with her, which I did. I really did. Um, but as we started the healing journey, it opened up other wounds,
Of
which
course it would have.
was then the complex PTSD diagnosis.
Yeah.
Wounds that I'd just buried so deeply. Yeah.
And I want to differentiate for our community the difference between CPTSD and PTSD. So, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So, CPTSD differs because it often stems from prolonged exposure to high stress or traumatic experiences, where PTSD is most commonly known after a one incident type of response to trauma. And as we know for many law enforcement, it's not just one event, but the accumulation of exposure to ongoing layer upon layer upon layer of distressing situations over time, as well as the suppression of that, right? It's having to suppress that and keep going, and not really face it, not acknowledge it, have a disconnection and like a disassociation nearly to the emotional component of what it is actually associated with the event itself, because you just have to keep going and have to give your full self to your next, I guess, case or job and so forth and so on.
Exactly. And that suppression, it was prolonged suppression. It was normal because, and I didn't realize till afterwards how long I'd been living on high alert, just emergency mode continuously. And that was normal for me. It just becomes a normal way of functioning. Completely, what's the term that was amygdala hijack, I think it's called.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't realize I found these things out afterwards. But yeah, that disconnection you talk about was something I didn't realize until afterwards as well. I didn't realize how far I've disconnected from loved ones, not just from
Yeah.
myself, but absolutely loved it. Like I was there physically. But that emotional numbness really, it was insane because I don't know if I was too scared to feel, because I know I had a lot of pain in there, so I was too scared to open it up. So I just completely shut down. This hero persona that I developed to protect the wounded me really did a job actually, but too good because when I when I started recovering and I started to feel again, that was actually quite a scary. No, not scary. It was a weird feeling, being able to feel. I actually went searching for the paralyzed me, like where I couldn't feel. You kind of, because that's what I was familiar with. Like I was so used to not feeling that I went searching for it. Like, okay, this.
And it's so common for individuals to completely numb themselves through the
Yeah,
experience. And some turn to other coping mechanisms, but our earliest coping mechanism, even through childhood, is disassociation. It's complete avoidance, it's complete numbing. And you fast forward however many years, we're a pro at it. We do it even without thinking. We flip into it, and it might be in the most mildest moments when we're having an argument or we're driving a car, to when we're actually genuinely under a lot of pressure. And I love that you've highlighted the amygdala as well. That's what I was kind of referring to previously, where if we're under any form of pressure, it doesn't matter if it's in association with like a trauma memory, but let's say any increased stress can easily trigger that amygdala to flare up and, like you said, hijack the brain and prevent your other parts of the brain from helping you make sense of the world around you. And it's only then natural for you to be emotion driven and not make sense of the world. But I love that you've identified the numbing component and how fearful it is to step into emotions. When we've been avoiding them for such a long time, and many clients, and sometimes me too, I'm not immune to any of this.
Yeah.
It's hard to sit in silence, and it's hard to then look inward and see what comes up. We're petrified. It's kind of like, what Pandora's box is going to open and what am I going to find there?
Yeah.
And at first, it is really hard to differentiate between the emotions or even sit in them or get comfortable with the uncomfortable, because at first, all of the emotions are uncomfortable. We've been avoiding them for such a long time.
Exactly.
It naturally is going to feel super, super awkward and weird and icky. So it makes beautiful sense why you felt really fearful of stepping into that space after such a long time of numbing.
Yeah. And simple things like I mentioned before, the sensitivity to noise and crowds, where things like shopping centres freaked the heck out of me. So we went through when she thought I was ready to step into that exposure therapy kind of area. We did that. So I would go to a shopping centre at the quietest times, like first thing in the morning, and I would do it incrementally. I'd go there in a really quiet time, and then just observe, not observe externally, but observe what's happening in me. And that's really where I started learning how to connect to my emotions again, getting emotionally intelligent again and things like this.
And also activating the emotions in a really safe, contained manner, right?
Correct.
Because
Yeah.
previously it was never contained. It was either extreme or none.
Correct. Yeah. And I would, I can't even describe how profound it is when it took hold of me. That panic was debilitating, but that exposure therapy, I would sit there in a quiet time, then observe what was happening. Any bit of discomfort, I would kind of read it and then label it and try and rationalize it in that setting. And then, when it became really comfortable, then I'd go, when it's a little bit more busy, do the same process again. But what got me, before I could get to that point, we did a process called EMDR, which for me was brutal. But that was the turning. That was the pivotal point. Like, it was brutal, but it was so beautifully handled, very delicately handled. Which is what I needed. So, and again, it was an incremental process. It was step by step by step. It was very gently done, but very uncomfortable, very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it did get worse before it got better, because you're digging up all this stuff again. Yeah.
Trauma work usually does, especially when it comes to EMDR, even though it's science-backed and it's gold standard for any trauma treatment, it is asking our clients, to step into the trauma, which is what everyone has been avoiding majority of their life. So I could appreciate, I've had it done on me before and I've trained in it recently, and it's a very interesting therapy approach for healing trauma, and it is a very, very scary experience.
It does. And we talked about that heightening of senses before, and I really felt that in my EMDR process was things that would come up is not just the memory and the emotional reaction attached to that memory, but also the other senses. Like, the smell of blood was a very distinct metallic smell. I don't mean to be too graphic here, but I
can
up,
appreciate.
That olfactory kind of feedback came thick and fast. But even death, has a distinct smell. And actually, even now, just me mentioning it, the smell comes back. It's
And what are you noticing in your body as it's coming back?
yeah, so unsettled, like in my
Yeah.
stomach area, which is where it usually happens. So yeah, unsettled, but just
Mm.
whereas before I would have frozen, completely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's, I guess, highlights the incredible work that you've been able to do to decrease the charge of the memory of said thing that would then trigger you. Even just the thought or the sensation or the smell that naturally would send you into disassociation and freeze. It sounds like it's now, well, and it's allowed to be uncomfortable. When we talk of these things, especially when it comes in the context of trauma, we're not saying that a healing journey means that you're going to be loving your memories from the past or being really joyful about them. It's about accepting that they have happened as part of your past experience, not your present experience.
yeah,
And when you do recall things from the past, you have a normal human reaction, but you're not pulled right back into re experiencing what you did at the time that that happened.
yeah, yeah. So, and that's why I'm at a point where I can actually, like you said in your intro, this is actually the first time I'm actually talking about this, and it really is liberating. It really is. I couldn't mention the Solomon Islands or any other. Uh, there were so many operations I was involved in that I can talk about now that I couldn't. So it is really quite liberating for me to be able to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult, and it's not just the EMDR and the exposure therapy. I I don't know. With healing, one thing really leads into the other, into the next, because it is a
Of
multifaceted,
course.
you know, journey. So I was drawn into things like breath work and um, cold water therapy, and just by virtue of the healing journey, I didn't actually actively go and seek these things. They kind of they just found me. So, I don't know I don't know if that makes sense, but
Completely. The
yeah,
universe throws things at us when we are ready to receive.
yeah.
So it makes beautiful sense.
And now I'm very much into, I guess, onto a spiritual. I don't want to use the word awakening because it sounds so cliche, but like um, I've um, I've become very much more spiritually attuned. Put it that way.
Mm.
Um, Exercise was another thing that played a massive role, and
Mm-hmm.
that was actually one of the first things my doctor and my therapist, the first therapist that I had, the one that I didn't get along with so well, they, I wouldn't say not get along with. I'm being too harsh, but
Didn't click.
didn't click.
You
Thank
didn't
you,
align.
thank you. Yeah. You said exercise, and honestly, I was feeling so awful. The last thing I wanted to do was exercise.
Was move. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to go for a walk. I didn't want to go to a gym or do all these things. Eventually, I did join a gym, but then I went into it with the wrong kind of exercise program, or you know, I, I went in there and did your 10 bicep curls and just
And
not
walked out.
standard. Yeah, it's not standard kind of workout program, and that I became disheartened. But then I found an intense program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that really clicked for me.
What you're sharing there, Sean, is this multifaceted approach to healing. There is no one right way to do it. There's no blueprint of exactly what to do in what order. I think it's us being able to tap into the resources that are available to us, trialing different things, seeing what aligns. What aligns for one person might not align for another, and just being compassionate to yourself in that journey, or even patient with yourself. I do know some people fall into the trap of, well, I tried mindfulness once and it didn't work for me, or I tried breathing once and it didn't work for me. It's like nothing ever just once is ever going to work. So I think it's just, normalizing the fact that there are a lot of things accessible to us. Try them, engage in them, be curious about them. If it aligns with you, it will. If it doesn't, let it go and move on. But give it more than just a couple of goes, because
Absolutely.
when our nervous system is dysregulated, it's going to take a very long time for your brain to actively believe that you are safe in the present moment.
Yes.
Because when we are experiencing trauma, and especially when there's been a compounding amount of trauma, your nervous system does not believe that it's safe, and it will see everything as a threat. So we have to be compassionate to that. And we also have to be patient to that. And just want to normalize that. It's so easy for us to get stuck in, because we've been in pain for such a long time. We just want the pain to go, and we just want anything to work really, really quickly. And if there was a magic pill or a magic wand, of course we would use it, but unfortunately that's not the case, and I think if we want to normalize that, I think it'll just help people to be gentle in their own experience of the healing journey.
Absolutely. And I've made all those mistakes that you've just outlined.
Me too.
I've made all of them, you know. I like earlier on in the piece, I tried meditating, but at the time I was so paranoid still, and I couldn't get my mind still enough and regulate my breathing to a point where I was calm, because I had too much other stuff to deal with. So I had to get those out of the way or learn how to manage those first before I could breathe and meditate, and then the two would work, cohesively. So yeah, absolutely. Don't try it once, and then if it doesn't work, give up, because you have to do it at the right time, I think. And really, like you said before, that self-care, I certainly wasn't kind to myself. I think that's a lifelong thing for me. Like, I demanded so much of myself, out, my body, and without replenishing. I just kept demanding and demanding and demanding without the self-care to recharge. I didn't do that until now. So,
and that's so powerful, because we don't admit that, right? We just go through the motions, and then and it's not to say blame yourself for putting pressure on yourself. We do know that, trauma in itself, if we are to look at it, it's not necessarily the traumatic event. It's then what we put ourselves through after the event has happened. And it's not to blame the individual, but it's also creating a sense of accountability and a sense of ownership and empowerment. And that's, the journey we need to get through. And I think as you speak of, your lack of self-care and nurturance through that experience, there will come obviously a turning point where that becomes priority, but it's such a normal part of that healing journey that's not,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, correct. Look, like I said, I made all the classic mistakes, and I felt all the classic emotions of, feeling destitute and, complete despair. And, there was a point where I reached what I felt like was a dead end. Like, hang on a second, this is just too overwhelming. I just can't see a way for this, and I think that was the pivotal point where I had the crossroads. I thought, okay, I could, but then for me, what influenced my decision to really face my demons was the fear of staying where I was at, the fear of staying in that horrible pit that became too much of a burden. It became, the fear of facing my demons became less. Like it was the lesser of two evils.
Mm-hmm.
I was still not a path I was looking forward to going down, because there was a lot of demons to face. And but the fear of getting stuck with that weight on my shoulders, it was too much of a weight to carry in the end. I had no choice. I had to do it. It was either that or just completely step into the abyss. So that crossroad, that junction is quite it's a scary place to be.
A very dark place to be.
Very dark place to be. And like you said before, like you really wish that, because you just want everything to go back to normal, to what you know, and you just wish it'll all go away. And it doesn't, obviously, but and there's no right time. If you're waiting for the right time, like, I've got to feel, when I feel right, then I'll seek help. The right time's not going to arrive. You're not going to feel right. You just have to take that, even if it's a little micro step. Just take it. Like the fear, and that's one thing I realize about the fear of facing your demons. Like we amplify it, like we catastrophize it. It's not. Yeah, I mean, EMDR wasn't great. Like it wasn't great, but it wasn't. Like I said, it was beautifully done. It was manageable, and it wasn't quite as bad as I expected it to be. And that's what I think a lot of us do. We tend to amplify the fear that we're feeling, so.
And so many people get stuck, just like you described you did, in minimizing. It's not as bad. I can still cope. I don't need the support. And we're not here forcing support down people's throats. I think it's more so just the acknowledgement of you're not coping and you're actually not functioning. If that, you're probably barely functioning. Or you may be taking it out on the people that you love and calling it anger, or have it being snappy, or just being stressed, or being busy. We like to really redirect, and sometimes acknowledging how bad it is or how serious it is, again, it blows into that kind of flows into that narrative of I'll be seen as weak, people will judge me, and the shame spiral of, I'm defective, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, and we hide in the shadows. And Brene Brown beautifully talks about how, if we speak our shame and we step out of those shadows, shame has no control over us. It actually withers and dies. But we're so controlled by it, and when we create even just the acknowledgement within ourselves to say this is what's happening and to face what we've been so scared to face, again, the shame over time does wither away. And I've got so much evidence in the work that I do with my clients in and around trauma. And there's so much research around it too, but I think it's only when you experience it yourself, like you today are able to share this story with us, because you're not letting shame rule you and control you, and you've kind of taken that control and you're stepping out into being able to be empowered in your story and not letting it pull you right back in. And that is the testament to the work that you've done and the genuine strength that you've over time learnt how to tap into, versus the strength that we thought we were using back
Absolutely,
then, to suppress and cope.
Yeah, you mentioned that word empowered, and I really do feel empowered by it all. And you're right, it's real strength. The courage to actually come out and talk about this. That's where the real strength lies, and trying to highlight to others. You mentioned anger and projecting that onto others. I certainly did that, and part of that was because of my denial for so long. The other part of it was even when I was diagnosed, and yeah, I told those close to me, I'd still hide it from everyone else, my friends and whatever. I wouldn't tell them. Just I was married at the time, so my brothers and sisters and my wife at the time. So, but I would still harbour some kind of I guess resentment. I guess because they couldn't understand what I was going through, or seemingly didn't understand what I was going through. And I wasn't seemingly because they actually couldn't understand what I was going through. But then I thought about it and I was like, hang on a second, I don't understand what's, I'm the one experiencing it and I can't make any sense of it. So how could I possibly expect somebody else to understand it? So yeah, that took a while to come to that realization. I didn't, in that initial stages of being diagnosed, I didn't have the time to process everything, because a few months after that, I lost my mum, and then a few months after that, my marriage dissolved, and so it was a lot of stuff that I had to deal with. So it did take longer than what it normally would have if those other events didn't occur. But I stuck in there, because I could see the difference it was making. Yeah, it was uncomfortable, like I keep saying, and it took a lot of unlearning and relearning, and rediscovery of, because I'd lost every sense of who I was. We talked about the identity before, so I had
completely
to relearn all of that stuff. Like I said earlier, with the spiritual connection that I'm on now, that's just a beautiful journey of self-discovery now. And again, it's not something that I sought out. It's just something that found me at the right time. Yeah.
And to have undergone layers upon layers of trauma, many of us that would not even fathom or understand or bring to mind that even exists, to losing loved ones and really having like layers of your past life just strip away from you.
Yeah.
We feel, from what I'm hearing, like there was this just bareness and nakedness that kind of then happened for you to have to rebuild. And sometimes what I'm sensing from the people I work with, whether it's on this platform or in my practice, it has to get to a point where we have nothing else left.
It does.
For us to actually take ownership and put the work in. And sometimes it doesn't have to get there, and we do encourage people to, of course, seek help early. But for some, it has to get to that pinnacle moment for it to be taken seriously.
And that's why I want to share what I'm sharing, because to prevent as many people as possible from getting to that point, because that crossroads that I talked about, quite often people make the wrong decision and end things, because it seems like there's no other way out than to step out of that's the only way to step out of your pain. So if I can prevent, by spreading this message, prevent people from getting to that point, because, the better. I mean, I've lost colleagues and friends to suicide, and, the pain for them might end, but then it's transferred over to whoever's left behind. So it doesn't really dissipate, it's just transferred.
And it does make beautiful sense at the time when you have everything stripped away from you and you have nothing left that you can really call your own, and you don't feel connected to anything. It does feel like a very, very justifiable reason.
Absolutely.
And the mind will think of things to try and end the pain, and all of a sudden that, seems as if it's a really good idea. And for anyone, of course, struggling with any thoughts of suicide or thoughts of not wanting to be here, of course, please connect with your local services. We will have details in the description below for you to access, because while we want to normalize it, as it is something at times we fall into the trap of, we want to empower people to know that there is hope in a time where they genuinely do feel very hopeless.
Absolutely. You've just reminded me of a story in it. There's a few variations of this story, but it's around a painting that actually exists, and it's called Checkmate. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. So
No.
the actual painting exists. It's
Mm-hmm.
privately owned as we speak. But at the time that the story came about, it was hanging up it was being displayed in the Louvre in France. And this particular day, so the painting depicts a game of chess, and the two players, one's a guy that he looks defeated, completely defeated. On the opposite side of the board is a really smug looking, I guess, demonic kind of figure, to say like, I've got you. And in between the two players is an angelic kind of looking figure. So that's the picture. And then, so on this one particular day, a group of chess players visited the Louvre. And one of the players was actually really drawn to this painting, and it's called Checkmate. And he studied the painting, and he calls a curator and said, look, the title of this painting doesn't match the painting, because what's in the painting is not a checkmate. The player on the right, the one that looks defeated, still has one more move.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is just a beautiful analogy of when you reach that point of seemingly feeling defeated, is that, there is a move. You just need to be still enough to find it. And that's the angelic figure in the picture, because if you just be still and look inward, you'll find that move. You'll find it. You're not going to find it externally. Like you said it before, there's no magic wand that's going to come along and or magic pill that's going to drive you out of where you are. It's all in there. It's all inside.
Mm-hmm.
Dark as it might seem, it's in there.
Yeah.
In there.
And from what you've just described there as well, it's this sense that we're so pulled into our suffering,
Mm.
and we are so distracted by, let's say, that demonic, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
right? It's a representation of whatever it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
that we're not actually looking truly at the game in front of us, in what type of power we actually do hold. And I love that you brought this to our episode today, because I think it beautifully depicts the level of hopelessness we at times feel and how stuck we get in that. And I'll put a link down below, of course, of if our community wants to see this painting, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
such a beautiful representation of our episode today, I think, as a whole, where, we can get pulled down into feeling hopeless and helpless, and like we have no capacity within ourselves to get ourselves away from what is keeping us stuck or in pain. But in fact, actually, we do. And if we can, even just for one person, create a sense of hope and for them to feel heard or seen through our episode today, we've been of service. And I think,
That was.
from what you and I discussed even in our discovery call and today's episode, that's all we want, is to be able to actually share for our ability to create and instill hope in those that are struggling and suffering in their darkness.
Yeah. God. Oh, I'm getting emotional here. Sorry.
It's
Oh,
okay.
thanks.
What's it bringing up for you?
look, just I hate the thought of anyone being in that place where I was, because I know how awful it is. I know how horrible and lonely it is, and look, I was challenged again, because it took from my diagnosis to a point where I felt free and robust again, a good 6 years, which really for PTSD isn't that long. But so it brings us up to 2020. And then, COVID kind of threw things up in the air for everybody. And then a few months into COVID, I had surgery. I had back surgery, which resulted in some nerve damage, and the condition is called cauda equina syndrome. And I had no idea. I'd never heard of cauda equina syndrome before they told me. And it's just nerve damage, damage to the nerve cluster at the base of your spine. So it fans out. That cluster fans out like a horse's tail, hence the equina reference. But and that affects your lower extremities and your digestive system, and there's a bit of a scale. There's quite a broad spectrum for that condition. I'm thankfully on the better lower end of that scale. It didn't.
Okay.
But it's a syndrome, so you're not sure.
Of course.
Certainly when. So it was like a 10-hour surgery, procedure, and I woke up when I came to the surgeons. They came up to me and said, "Look, the way it's turned out, like with cauda equina syndrome, you might, like, worst case scenario, you're going to end up paraplegic, or you're going to have some complications for the rest of your life." It's quite an unappetizing menu, it doesn't matter what you choose. With that, I did fall for a little while back into that victim mindset, because I just started this great recovery journey with PTSD. I was, my life was being pieced together again beautifully, and everything was making sense again. And I had this new sense of identity, like I felt rejuvenated and I felt light. And now this. So I went into that, why the hell is this happening? And then again, I felt like the checkmate figure, defeated. But the thing with resilience and healing is that you get all these tools, you really build up your toolbox. So I had I had these tools at my disposal that I could use in my recovery from cauda equina, which again is a challenge in itself, because for a very long time I was on crutches, and then I couldn't walk more than 10 meters for a long time, very long time. I still have a limit. It's about 3 kilometers, but I'm good. But I'm really good because I could use those tools, and the reason I think the reason I recovered so well was because of my mindset. That victim mindset didn't last very. I kicked that to the curb quite quickly. Yeah.
And it sounds as well, because of the work that you've already done and being able to face pain and discomfort and emotions, and knowing how important it is to process things for your own empowerment, that naturally was, making you resilient for the next hit and the next hit and the next hit, right?
Absolutely.
It's not to say it wouldn't have hurt, but that's the difference between suppression and it, numbing and not actually experiencing or processing things as they happen, or actually going through the hardship head on. As uncomfortable as it is, and I'm sure from what it sounds like, it would have completely shaken up your world that was only just, being put back together. it sounds like, and I often describe this to my clients as well, you're going to have setbacks, but you're never at where you started, because these setbacks, because they feel similar because they feel shit.
Yeah,
I'm not going to minimize that.
yeah,
But what happens is you don't unlearn everything, and your capacity to get yourself back out of that is so much quicker, and you're gonna be so much more confident at facing the things that are gonna hit you. And we want to normalize that. Healing is never done, and you are going to have challenges and traumas and adversities thrown at you. That's what the human experience is. It's this yin and yang, of beauty and love and joy and excitement, and the trauma and the hardship and the challenge. Both are supposed to happen. And if we can, just like you, Sean, have been able to empower yourself with tools and skills and a mindset, where you actually lean into that discomfort, into that pain, and help yourself through that with all of your tools, all of the people around you, you're more likely to be able to get yourself through even the most intense of challenges.
100%. And those tools are, so we all have a wealth of, like an absolute treasure of power.
Yeah.
We just kind of separated from it. But when you learn the tools to access it, it becomes easier and easier. That's why, the quarter equiner, again, like PTSD and quarter equiner, they're both silent assassins because nobody understands.
No.
Outwardly, if you saw me in person and you saw me walking, you wouldn't think anything was wrong with me. But inwardly, and from what I'm feeling, because I can't physically feel my legs, and a lot of people can't understand that. So the motor neurons are, they're fine, but the sensory neurons are shot. So a lot of people would say, because their point of reference would be to something they understand. So I'll get asked a lot, so is it like pins and needles? And I said, well, no, it's nothing like pins and needles, because it's no different to touching your leg and then touching a tabletop, because you can't. There's no sensory feedback from touching a tabletop. So that's what I get from touching my legs. I can't actually physically feel them. So that's it.
Yeah.
But so the point I'm trying to make is the old Sean would have been frustrated by that somebody can't understand how bad it is that I've got it. How bad, but as was the case with PTSD, and depression, a lot of people think you're just feeling a bit sad, a bit off. It's nothing like that, and I used to get frustrated because people didn't understand that, but you learn to shove that to the side, and it's like, okay, externally, people aren't going to get it, but there's nothing I can do to change that. I can't control that. Then I can just focus on what I can control, which is myself and how I get through this. Yeah.
Well, Sean, tell us a little bit about what you do now. I know that you work as a wellness coach, a speaker, and you have your own podcast as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do now, and how does that, I guess, give your life meaning or purpose?
Again, with the speaking engagements. So I started off just addressing emergency services agencies. So, St. John's, the paramedics, police services, fireys, in terms of addressing their mental health, trying to initiate some kind of cultural shift. It's going to take a few generations to shift the culture, but just to get, especially at recruit level. There's a guy, WA Police, that I interviewed on my podcast, Anthony Pym, who's doing great work in addressing police recruits, self-care, and, addressing mental health challenges early in the career, kind of putting the cultural constraints to the side and just doing what's most important. So those are my speaking engagements. I also do a podcast around basically reclaiming your sense of self-worth after adversity or during adversity, because you lose complete sense of who you are, and your self-confidence erodes, and your sovereignty, basically. You just, so it really is a message of hope that I'm trying to, yeah. So there's the podcast was basically a side project because I just wanted to cast a wider net, with my message, but it's grown exponentially, and it's beautiful, actually. It's quite humbling. Yeah.
And to be able to have such a story as well, and for you to feel comfortable enough to share it on our platform, honestly, is a beautiful honor. And I do want to take this moment to acknowledge the depth of what you've been able to share today. Naturally, opening up about something like this for the first time is definitely no small thing. And I know that your words will resonate with so many people who might feel alone in their struggles. And, it's something that I think resonated for me when we connected originally as well,
Yeah.
because of, the work that you do. And it's not just your story, but I think the way that you are, a person of service to the community, and being able to be that light, and have experienced it yourself, people are able to connect with that on such a deeper level. And like I mentioned, to be able to provide that space on our platform for you to feel safe enough to share your story, I truly feel humbled by that, and very thankful that we have crossed paths.
So am I. I'm really appreciated. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's. I want to get emotional again, but no, look, it really is pleasure to be able to talk about this, and hopefully instill some kind of, like you said before, even if it's just the one person, just to resonate with somebody, because and also with mental health, there's such a small degree of separation. If you're not actually going through it yourself, somebody is. So yeah,
Absolutely.
so if somebody takes something away from these conversations, then I'm happy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to close us off, what message would you have for our community if they are struggling themselves?
The isolation that you're feeling is an illusion, as real as it feels, because isolation is a big part, whether it's self-isolation or just isolation in terms of feeling disconnected. It's an illusion, because you can never be truly disconnected from anyone or anything. So reframe the isolation into, think of it as a space of solitude where you can actually, where you now have the opportunity to be still, turn inward, and wait for that light to appear, because it's there. It's just waiting for you to be still enough to find it. Externally, the support is there. Like I said, the isolation is an illusion. Like there's so much support around you. Just have the courage to take those steps to get that support. But to find that light, it's already there. It's already there. Just be still enough to find it. It's that's the message I think I'd like to leave people with.
Sean, thank you so much for your vulnerability and for trusting me and the Self Reflections podcast to bring your story to our community.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Of course, for our community, if you have any questions for Sean, please put them in the comments below. I will have all of Sean's contact details below if you'd like to get in touch with him. And of course, thank you for tuning into the Self Reflections podcast. If you found value in today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. And until next time, take care and keep reflecting.